What if the most powerful currency in the world wasn't just gold or oil, but something far more fundamental? But something invisible, a silent force that dictates nearly every aspect of our modern lives? A chilling new carbon Cold War has quietly begun, where a nation's carbon emissions have become a potent economic weapon. It's rapidly creating entirely new energy superpowers on the world stage, shifting the balance of power, while raising the truly terrifying possibility of a future world where your personal carbon footprint directly determines your freedom and access to essential resources. A grim prospect indeed. The full in-depth story. A special ATM documentary presentation. Let's dive in.
They report the chaos. We reveal the agenda.
Good evening and welcome to ATM. We often consider gold, oil, or even digital currencies as the ultimate measures of wealth and power. But what if the most powerful currency in the world wasn't any of these tangible or digital assets, but something entirely invisible, a force that subtly yet profoundly dictates every aspect of our modern lives, from our daily choices to global geopolitics? Imagine a near future, not a distant fantasy, where your individual carbon footprint, the environmental impact of your actions, directly determines your personal wealth, your societal influence, and even your nation's standing on the global stage. This isn't merely a concept from science fiction. It is the emerging reality of the carbon currency, and it is already fundamentally reshaping the very fabric of global power as we have known it for centuries. For many decades, climate change was largely perceived as a distant, abstract threat, a problem for future generations to contend with. However, now, in October 2025, that perception has dramatically shifted. It is a stark, undeniable, and immediate reality impacting every corner of the globe. Record-breaking heat waves are scorching continents, devastating floods are submerging entire regions, and catastrophic wildfires are raging uncontrollably across vast landscapes. These extreme weather events are no longer isolated anomalies. They have become the new, terrifying normal that we must all confront. The scientific consensus on this matter is absolute and unequivocal. We are rapidly running out of precious time to avert the most catastrophic consequences. The latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, report, which was released in the spring of 2025, issued a dire warning, stating with utmost urgency that global emissions must be halved by the critical year of 2030 to avoid triggering irreversible tipping points within our planet's delicate climate system. This means immediate and drastic action is required on a global scale. This existential threat, unprecedented in human history, has compelled a dramatic and fundamental shift in how nations perceive and manage their economies. The old paradigm, which prioritized unlimited economic growth at any environmental cost, is now unequivocally dead and buried. The new, urgent imperative that guides global policy and economic strategy is the drastic reduction of carbon emissions, recognizing that our planet's health is inextricably linked to our economic well-being and long-term survival. But this raises a profound and complex question. How exactly do you assign a tangible economic value, a price, to something as invisible and ubiquitous as carbon? An element that literally fuels and underpins our entire modern civilization and industrial infrastructure? How do we quantify its impact and integrate it into our financial systems? The answer to this complex challenge began to emerge through the development of intricate and often controversial carbon markets. These systems were initially conceived under the foundational Kyoto Protocol and subsequently formalized and expanded in landmark international agreements, such as the Paris Agreement. The primary objective of these markets was clear: to establish a tangible economic price on pollution, thereby incentivizing its reduction and fostering a more sustainable global economy. The underlying idea behind these carbon markets is deceptively simple yet profoundly impactful. A cap is set on the total amount of carbon that can be emitted across a specific sector or economy. Within this cap, Companies are allocated or can purchase permits to emit a certain amount of carbon. The genius lies in the trading mechanism. If a company successfully reduces its emissions below its allocated permits, it can sell its unused permits for profit. Conversely, if a company emits more than its allowance, it is compelled to purchase additional permits from others, creating a powerful financial incentive for emission reduction. This system has led to the significant growth of major carbon trading schemes across the globe. Notably, the EU Emissions Trading System, or ETS, has expanded considerably by 2025, now encompassing not only industrial emissions, but also the vast and impactful maritime shipping sector. Simultaneously, China's national ETS has rapidly ascended to become the largest carbon market in the entire world, demonstrating a massive commitment to carbon pricing on an unprecedented scale. To illustrate the current economic impact, let's look at some hypothetical 2025 carbon prices. The EU ETS, for instance, is seeing carbon prices around €100 per ton, reflecting a strong market demand for emission reductions. In contrast, China's ETS, while the largest in volume, has a current price point of approximately $20 per ton, indicating different market dynamics and regulatory approaches within its vast economy. The EU ETS, in particular, has experienced an extraordinary surge in carbon prices, transforming it into an incredibly powerful economic lever that influences industrial decisions across the continent. What initially began as a relatively niche environmental policy has rapidly evolved into a multi-trillion-dollar global market, giving rise to an entirely new and significant asset class, carbon credits. These credits are now traded and valued much like traditional commodities, fundamentally altering financial landscapes. However, the concept of carbon currency extends far beyond the mere trading of permits. It represents a fundamental and profound revaluation of our entire global economic system, challenging long-held assumptions about value and wealth. The critical question arises: what truly happens when carbon, once an invisible byproduct, becomes the ultimate denominator, the foundational metric that influences every major economic decision? From investment strategies and international trade agreements to the delicate balance of geopolitical alliances and power structures, consider the implications. What happens when a nation's carbon capital, its ability to manage and reduce its carbon footprint, its reserves of clean energy, and its capacity for sustainable development becomes just as, if not more, important than its traditional financial capital, its gold reserves, or its GDP? This shift fundamentally redefines national strength and global influence. This transformation is no longer solely about environmental policy or ecological preservation. It is, at its core, about the redistribution and redefinition of global power itself. This invisible yet immensely potent force is already actively dictating which industries will thrive and expand, which nations will emerge as global leaders and innovators, and ultimately, who will hold the real and decisive leverage in the complex and ever-evolving geopolitical arena of the 21st century. In the next compelling part of our series, we will delve deeper and expose precisely how this invisible currency, the carbon currency, is already profoundly reshaping national economies across the globe, creating new winners and losers in the race towards a sustainable future. We've seen how the urgency of climate change gave birth to carbon markets, transforming environmental concerns into economic drivers. This evolution has reshaped global financial landscapes. Now, in October 2025, the carbon currency isn't just a niche market, it's a fundamental part of a nation's balance sheet, deeply integrated into economic planning and policymaking. It represents a significant shift in how countries value their environmental impact. It dictates competitiveness, influences trade wars, and creates a whole new class of winners and losers on the global stage, fundamentally altering international economic relations. This new currency is a powerful tool, reshaping alliances and rivalries. The first major economic impact comes from carbon border adjustment mechanisms, or CBAMs, which are designed to level the playing field for industries in countries with strong climate policies. These mechanisms are a direct response to the global challenge of carbon emissions. The EU pioneered this in 2023, effectively imposing a carbon tariff on imports from countries with weaker climate policies, thereby encouraging global decarbonization. This move by the EU set a precedent for other nations to follow. By 2025, the US, Canada, and even Japan are finalizing their own versions of CBAMs, signaling a widespread adoption of these carbon tariffs. This global trend indicates a growing commitment to addressing climate change through economic measures. This is a seismic shift in global trade. Suddenly, a nation's carbon emissions aren't just an environmental problem, they're a direct economic barrier, impacting trade flows and national competitiveness. The economic implications are profound and far-reaching. Industries in high-emission economies, from steel to cement, are being forced to adapt or face being priced out of major markets, accelerating the transition to cleaner production methods. This pressure is driving innovation and technological advancements. A recent study by the WTO in 2025 estimates CBAMs could redirect over $200 billion in trade flows by 2030, fundamentally reshaping global supply chains and economic partnerships. This redirection highlights the significant financial impact of these policies. The carbon currency is also driving an unprecedented global investment arms race in green technology as nations vie for leadership in sustainable innovation. This competition is fueling rapid advancements in renewable energy and other green sectors. Nations with abundant renewable energy potential or cutting-edge green tech are becoming economic powerhouses, attracting significant investment and fostering new industries. Their strategic advantage is now tied to their environmental assets. The US's Inflation Reduction Act and the EU's Green Deal Industrial Plan are pouring trillions into making their economies carbon neutral, demonstrating a massive commitment to green infrastructure and innovation. These initiatives are transforming national economies. This isn't just about climate. It's about securing future economic dominance, as countries recognize that environmental leadership translates into long-term prosperity and global influence. The race for green technology is a race for economic power. Countries are competing fiercely to attract green jobs and industries, realizing that their long-term prosperity is directly tied to their carbon footprint and their ability to innovate sustainably. This competition is reshaping national economic strategies. Goldman Sachs estimated that global green investment now surpasses fossil fuel investment for the first time in history, marking a pivotal moment in the global energy transition. This shift signifies a new era of sustainable finance. And as carbon becomes currency, it also becomes a tool of diplomacy, influencing international relations and creating new forms of leverage. This new diplomatic tool is reshaping global power dynamics. Nations with vast natural carbon sinks, like the rainforests of Brazil or Indonesia, now hold immense carbon capital, giving them significant bargaining power on the global stage. Their natural resources are now economic assets. Developed nations are increasingly willing to pay for these nations to preserve their forests, effectively buying carbon credits to offset their own emissions, fostering a new form of international cooperation. This exchange benefits both parties, promoting conservation and emission reduction. This creates a new form of power, allowing previously marginalized nations to exert significant influence on the global stage, as their environmental assets become crucial for global climate goals. Their role in international affairs is growing. But this newfound power is not without its risks, including potential exploitation and challenges in equitable distribution of benefits. In the next part, we'll delve into the profound geopolitical shifts driven by this invisible currency, exploring both its opportunities and its dangers. The carbon currency is not just reshaping economies, it's fundamentally altering the very fabric of global commerce and financial systems. Indeed, it's redrawing the maps of global power, shifting influence and leverage between nations in unprecedented ways. Old alliances, once thought immutable, are now being strained under the pressure of new environmental and economic priorities. Conversely, new partnerships are rapidly forming, driven by shared interests in green technologies and sustainable development. The very concept of national interest is being profoundly redefined, viewed increasingly through the critical lens of carbon emissions and environmental impact. This marks the emergence of a new world order, where environmental stewardship becomes a cornerstone of geopolitical strategy. This profound transformation is driven by an invisible hand, the pervasive and often subtle influence of carbon pricing and climate policies. The most significant realignment is unfolding between the West and major industrial powers, such as China and India, creating a complex web of competition and cooperation. The EU and US, through mechanisms like carbon border adjustment mechanisms, known as CBAMs, and substantial green tech investments, are implicitly pressuring these nations to accelerate their decarbonization efforts. However, these measures are perceived by some as a new form of protectionism designed to favor developed economies. This has led to what many analysts are now calling a carbon Cold War, a struggle for economic and environmental dominance. China, while actively building the world's largest domestic emissions trading scheme, or ETS, is demonstrating its commitment to managing its own carbon footprint. Simultaneously, China is investing heavily in green technology to maintain its manufacturing edge and strategically avoid Western carbon tariffs, positioning itself as a leader in sustainable production. This dual strategy allows China to control domestic emissions while becoming a global leader in green technologies, effectively bypassing potential trade barriers. India, balancing its massive development needs with crucial climate commitments, is advocating for significant financial transfers from developed nations to aid its green transition, emphasizing the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. India has been particularly critical of developed nations' failure to meet their financial commitments, leading to frequent tensions and clashes with Western negotiators in international climate forums. These diplomatic disagreements highlight the deep-seated challenges in achieving equitable global climate action and financial support. Ultimately, the battle for global supply chain control has now transformed into a carbon battle, where environmental performance dictates economic viability and market access. Beyond the tensions, the carbon currency is also forging entirely new alliances, uniting nations with shared environmental goals and resource advantages. Countries rich in renewable energy resources, such as the vast solar potential of Australia, which is ideal for large-scale solar farms and green hydrogen production, or the abundant geothermal power of Iceland, which provides a stable and clean energy source for its industries and communities, and the immense hydropower of Canada, a long-standing source of clean electricity, are rapidly becoming the new energy superpowers on the global stage. These nations are actively forming partnerships to develop green hydrogen and other carbon-neutral fuels, leveraging their natural endowments to drive the global energy transition. This collaborative effort is fundamentally reshaping the global energy map, moving away from fossil fuel dependence towards a decentralized, renewable energy future. This profound shift in energy production and consumption inevitably shifts power away from traditional petrostates, whose economic models are tied to hydrocarbon extraction. Nations that adapt quickly to the green energy transition, embracing innovation and sustainable practices, are poised to become the energy exporters of the future, leading the charge in a new economic paradigm. Conversely, those clinging to fossil fuels and resisting the transition risk economic irrelevance, facing declining demand and increasing regulatory pressures. A significant report by the International Energy Agency in 2025 highlighted a pivotal moment. Investment in clean energy infrastructure now dwarfs investment in new oil and gas production globally, signaling a clear turning point. However, the carbon currency doesn't solely create new alliances and opportunities. It also has the potential to fracture old ones, creating internal divisions and geopolitical instability. This fracturing of established relationships can lead to unforeseen consequences and challenges for international cooperation. Within blocs like the EU, member states with different economic structures and industrial bases face varying impacts from carbon pricing, leading to internal disagreements. Heavy industrial nations, with their carbon-intensive industries, often struggle to adapt to stringent carbon regulations, facing higher costs and competitive disadvantages. In contrast, service-based economies, with their lower carbon footprints, tend to adapt faster and more seamlessly to the new carbon-constrained environment. This disparity creates significant internal tensions and political friction within these blocs, challenging their unity and decision-making processes. The transition to a carbon-neutral world is far from uniform, with different regions and nations progressing at vastly different speeds and with varying levels of commitment. Crucially, its costs are not evenly distributed, often disproportionately burdening developing nations or those heavily reliant on traditional industries, exacerbating existing inequalities. This complex landscape creates both opportunities for unprecedented cooperation on global environmental challenges and shared economic growth. Yet, it also fosters deep-seated resentments among those who feel unfairly burdened or marginalized by the transition, leading to potential conflicts. Ultimately, this intricate interplay is reshaping global diplomacy one invisible carbon atom at a time, influencing every negotiation and international agreement. In our final part, we will explore the stark choices ahead for humanity, choices that will determine the future trajectory of our planet and its inhabitants. We will also delve into the critical question of who will ultimately control this ultimate currency, the carbon currency, and what that control will mean for global power dynamics. We've journeyed through the rise of the carbon currency, its impact on national economies, and its role in redrawing the geopolitical map. Now, we arrive at the ultimate question: who controls this invisible power? Who sets the price? And what does it mean for our individual freedom in a world where your carbon footprint could determine your destiny? The initial control rests with governments and international bodies like the UNFCCC and IMO that set the rules for carbon markets. But below them, a new class of data lords is emerging. These are the companies that measure, verify, and track carbon emissions at every level, from satellites monitoring deforestation to AI algorithms calculating your personal carbon footprint from your credit card transactions. The power to accurately measure carbon is the power to influence its price, to identify violators, and ultimately, to shape behavior. The integrity of this data is paramount, but also a potential single point of failure or manipulation. This leads to the most controversial aspect: the potential for personal carbon footprints to become a widely adopted metric. Imagine every purchase, every trip, every energy consumption decision being tallied and translated into a personal carbon score. This score could then influence your access to goods, your travel options, or even your social standing. Advocates argue this is necessary for rapid decarbonization. Critics warn of an unprecedented era of surveillance and control, a carbon credit social credit system. The debate over digital identity in 2025 now largely centers on the inclusion and management of personal carbon data. It's a tightrope walk between environmental salvation and individual freedom. The carbon currency is not going away. It is rapidly becoming the universal language of global power. The choices we make now will determine whether this invisible force leads to a more sustainable, equitable world or a fragmented one ruled by new forms of control. Will we allow it to be monopolized by a few powerful entities, or will we demand transparent, decentralized, and equitable systems? The battle for the carbon currency is a battle for our future. The fight for control of the invisible gold has just begun. Thank you for joining me on ATM.